You don't quit because you're weak. You quit because something invisible is working against you. At the beginning, you feel motivated, focused, certain this time will be different. You plan, you commit, you tell yourself, this is it. And then, a few days later, the energy disappears. Not suddenly, quietly. And you start asking yourself the wrong question. What's wrong with me? But here's the truth most people never hear. The moment you decide to change, your brain starts resisting it. Not because change is bad, but because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels dangerous. At the start, change feels exciting. Your brain releases dopamine, the chemical of anticipation, of possibility, of becoming someone new. This is why beginnings feel powerful. Not because you've changed yet, but because your brain imagines the reward. But here's what no one tells you. Dopamine is not a fuel for consistency. It's a fuel for starting. Once the novelty fades, once the routine appears, the dopamine drops, and suddenly, effort feels heavier, progress feels slower, and motivation feels gone. Not because you failed, but because your brain moved from fantasy to reality, and reality requires something dopamine can't provide. Your brain is not designed for growth. It is designed for survival, and survival depends on one thing: predictability. The moment you try to change, you introduce uncertainty, new habits, new routines, new outcomes. To your brain, this is not progress, it is risk, so it responds the only way it knows how, by pulling you back toward what feels familiar. This is why procrastination appears. This is why comfort becomes tempting. This is why quitting feels relieving. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is protecting its baseline. Change threatens the known, and the brain defends the known, even when the known is painful. Willpower feels powerful, but it's unreliable. It depends on sleep, on stress, on emotions, on how hard your day has been. This is why willpower works, until it doesn't. You can push yourself for a while. You can force discipline temporarily. But eventually, something breaks. Not because you're weak, but because willpower is a limited resource. The brain gets tired of resisting itself, and when willpower is gone, the old patterns return. This is why relying on willpower creates cycles. Strong start, short push, burnout, quit. Real consistency is built when effort stops, depending on how much strength you have left. Discipline does not come from force. It comes from structure. People who stay consistent don't rely on motivation or willpower. They rely on systems that remove choice. When the decision is already made, there is nothing to debate. You don't ask how you feel. You don't wait for the right mood. You follow what was decided before resistance appeared. This is why routines matter. This is why schedules work. This is why simplicity beats intensity. Discipline becomes sustainable when action is no longer optional. Most people fail not because they are incapable, but because their standards are unrealistic. They plan their days as if energy will always be high, as if focus will always be available, as if life will cooperate. And when reality interferes, they interpret resistance as a personal failure. Disciplined people do not chase ideal conditions. They build systems that function even on bad days. Instead of asking, "How much should I do today?" they ask a different question. What is the smallest action that still counts as showing up? 10 minutes of focused work, one paragraph written, one short walk, one intentional decision. Minimum standards protect momentum. They remove the pressure that kills consistency. They allow progress without emotional negotiation. And over time, these small actions compound into something far bigger than occasional bursts of motivation. Consistency survives when perfection is no longer required. Long-term change does not come from motivation. It comes from identity. Most people try to change what they do without changing who they believe they are. They say, "I want to be more disciplined. I want to be more focused. I want to be more productive." But deep down, their self-image remains the same. They still see themselves as someone who procrastinates, as someone who starts strong and fades quickly, as someone who struggles with consistency. Behavior will always return to the level of identity. Disciplined people do not force themselves to act. They act because the behavior feels consistent with who they believe they are. They don't say, "I have to work today." They say, "I am someone who shows up, even when it's uncomfortable." Each small action becomes evidence. I did this. This is what I do. This is who I am. Identity is built through repetition, not affirmations. You don't think your way into becoming disciplined. You behave your way there. And once identity shifts, discipline no longer feels heavy. It feels natural. Discipline feels hard not because you are weak. It feels hard because your brain is resisting change. The human brain is designed to conserve energy. Anything unfamiliar is perceived as a potential threat. When you try to act differently, wake up earlier, focus longer, avoid distractions, your brain reacts with discomfort. This discomfort is not failure. It is a biological response. Your brain prefers patterns it already knows, even if those patterns are harmful. From a neuroscience perspective, habits are neural pathways. The more often a pathway is used, the stronger it becomes. Discipline requires creating new pathways, and at first, those pathways are weak. That is why the first days feel heavy. That is why resistance is loud. That is why procrastination suddenly feels intense. Your brain is not asking, "Is this good for you?" It is asking, "Is this familiar?" Dopamine plays a role here. Dopamine is released when behavior is predictable and rewarding. Scrolling, avoiding effort, choosing comfort. Discipline delays reward. And the brain does not like delayed rewards. But here's the key shift. Each time you act despite resistance, the brain adapts. The discomfort fades not because the task becomes easier, but because the brain learns this behavior is safe. What feels hard at first becomes neutral. What becomes neutral becomes automatic. And what becomes automatic no longer requires discipline. Most people try to fight resistance. They push harder. They criticize themselves. They wait to feel ready. This only makes resistance stronger. Resistance is not an enemy. It is information. It tells you where change is happening. Instead of asking, "How do I eliminate resistance?" ask, "How do I lower the cost of action?" Make the task smaller, shorter, less demanding. If starting feels hard, your standard is too high. Lower it. 5 minutes, one paragraph, one small action. then stop. This teaches the brain something important. Action does not lead to danger, it leads to completion. Another effective strategy is to separate identity from outcome. You are not trying to perform perfectly. You are practicing showing up. Showing up is the win. Not results. Not motivation. Not confidence. Each time you act despite resistance, you weaken its power. Not because it disappears, but because you stop negotiating with it. Resistance loses influence when it is no longer respected. You don't need to feel ready. You need to start small and repeat. Lasting change is not created by motivation. It is created by identity. Most people try to change behavior without changing how they see themselves. They say, I want to be disciplined. I want to be consistent. I want to be focused. But identity doesn't respond to intention. It responds to evidence. Every small action is a vote for the type of person you believe you are. When you show up, even briefly, you send your brain a signal. I am someone who follows through. This is how discipline becomes automatic. Not through pressure, not through intensity, but through repetition. Over time, you stop relying on effort. You no longer ask, should I do this today? You already know the answer. This is the moment when discipline stops feeling heavy, because it is no longer something you force. It is something you expect from yourself. And once behavior aligns with identity, consistency becomes natural. Not perfect, not dramatic, just reliable. This is how real change happens. Quietly, gradually, and permanently.